Hello. Today I will be featuring a commentary that has been much requested ever since the buffs to this ship came through. And that is of course the Grozovoy. The Grosovoy has been buffed yet again. I feel like Wargaming has really had issues balancing the ship. They started it out as this great anti-air destroyer, and then I made an example of how, well, ridiculous the anti-air on the ship was, and they nerfed the anti-air significantly. And ever since that nerf, they have kind of been struggling to find an identity to the ship, and ultimately it looks like they've decided they want it to be a sort of gunboat, but not quite like the Kaba. And well, in its current iteration, the ship has insanely good reload. With the build I'm using, I get the reload down to 3.2 seconds, which is very impressive. And they have buffed the concealment to the point that if you run full stealth build, as I do in this commentary, you can reach 6 kilometers of concealment. Now that's not quite up to the level of things like the super stealthy DDs, but it is very competitive, and that means of course that you can aggressively push caps in the Grozovoi, something which you have struggled to do in the past. Now I see that the enemy DDs, they have 4 DDs, and there's none on A, and there's only 1 at C, so I expect there to be 3 DDs at B. And of course I expect them to sail towards A as well, since they have so much fleet back up here, so this is the natural direction I would expect them to sail, so I send preemptive torpedoes that way. Now Grosovoy, as you saw me snipe down that plane, Grosovoy AA is still a great strength. The AA on the ship is still very good. It's not ridiculous as it was in the past, but it's still very useful. And especially of course since you can slot defensive AA. There is some debate about whether slotting speed boost, but I don't consider it worth it because, well, once again, the defensive AA is such a strength, and I don't think you dare to slot speed boost. Shiratsuyu that was at B was heading towards A as I predicted, and he sailed right into my predictive torps. That is of course something, well, if you have a good idea of where the enemy is going, that is of course something you can do in all DDs. The Grosovoy torps are quite slow, with a very long cooldown, but unlike the Kaba, you still have your 10 km torps, and they are very stealthy, because of course the slower the torps are, usually the better their concealment, and that's of course why I was able to catch the Shiratsuyu completely off guard with those torpedoes and score a quick kill on him. Now, it's still kind of sketchy with contesting cap points in this thing. The reason why I say it's kind of sketchy is because this ship is still extremely clumsy. Now, it's not Khabarovsk levels of clumsy, well, Kaba accelerates a lot better, but this thing is massive. The Grosovoy is still pretty much cruiser sized. It's a very big destroyer. The mine pops radar for me, and now you get to see the gun power this ship has. When it comes to fighting other DDs, you are extremely good. In fact, Shimakazes, Gearings, any US and IGN DDs, you kinda just wreck in a 1 versus 1. As long as you're not close enough that their torpedoes become an issue, you will wreck them. If you're close enough that torpedoes could become an issue, then it's kind of a coin toss, because you have a 720 meter turning circle, your massive ship, and even if you run rudder shift, you have a 3.7 second rudder shift. If you don't run rudder shift, you have a 4.6. So with that combined with the huge size and the large turning circle, of course means that you're not very good at torpedo beating at all. Also, if you get caught while being stationary, your acceleration is not very good at all either. So once again, if you get very close to these much more agile ships, the torpedoes become a huge issue. Also, if you push into a cap, and both the fleets are backing up, you got your fleet backing you up, and they got their fleet backing them up, they probably have an advantage, because once again your huge size works against you. You eat a lot of AP penetrations, you're very large in general, so it's quite easy for both DDs, I mean cruisers and battleships in general, to hit you, whereas hitting an agile Shimakaze or Yugumo or whatever isn't necessarily that easy. And unlike of course the Kaba, which has significant armor to protect it, you have none of that armor. You just have a large health pool, so you take a lot more damage than a Kaba does. So while you can push caps, the new buffed concealment puts your concealment at 6, as I said. While you can push caps with this, it's still debatable. It's not as risk free. Well, not I can't say call it risk free, but let's say it's significantly riskier than in IGN or well German or any other DDs. This is by far the riskiest DD to do it in, even though you have the concealment, simply because of the size. You risk eating so much damage doing it. So do I consider the ship, do I think they buffed it too much? I really have a hard time with that. For example, there are some ships like the Z52, he just kind of shits on you. If you know what, if the Z52 knows what he's doing, meaning he can just of course smoke up Hydro and then use AP to shred you. And I mean, if he doesn't have smoke, it's pretty even. You do a lot of damage to him, but he does a lot of damage to you. The issue is, of course, you can't show broadside to the Z52. If you show broadside, he'll do 45k AP volleys on you. And if you angle in towards him, then you risk sailing into his great torpedoes. So that fight is fairly close, if he doesn't have Smoke and Hydra. If he has Smoke and Hydra, then he obviously just wins the fight, because Z52 wins the fight against every DD if he has those tools available. Kaba beats you in a straight up gunfight pretty convincingly. You don't deal nearly enough damage to him, whereas he deals tons of damage to you. So that's also a pretty skewed fight. Gearing, you beat, once again, as long as torpedoes are an issue. Shima, of course, loses to everyone, including the Grozovoy, quite significantly, as long as he doesn't land any torps on you. So the Grozovoy, I would say, is in a fairly good spot right now. It's kind of I would say it's a hybrid, much like the Gearing and the Z52, but whereas the Z52 is, I would say, a hybrid that is more torpedo-oriented, the Grosovoy is absolutely a hybrid that is more gun-oriented, because the torps, they don't deal that much damage, they have a massive cooldown, and ultimately almost all your power comes from the guns, and the guns are kind of your bread and butter, and you have this AA flavor on top. So I would say the ship is in a pretty good position right now. 1 versus 1 against certain deities, it can feel overpowered because of it has so much health, so much DPS, and of course thanks to its speed you can't really outrun it. But in a fleet situation where other people can actually shoot you, the massive size of this ship works against it quite significantly, because as I said, you're big, you're clumsy, and you eat a lot of damage. Now, you have seen me pop in defensive AA quite a bit to snipe down spotter planes and fighter planes to keep myself from being detected. That is, of course, the strength. And I do think that you kind of have to run the defensive AA, because I don't feel that speed boost, while it would give you a significant increase in both the acceleration issue and the speed issue, not being able to snipe those planes and remaining spotted is a huge issue, because once again you can't sail around and gunboat the same way a Kaba can. You cannot do that because you are not agile and tanky and small enough to be able to get away with it. Also, you kind of give up your whole concealment thing if you try to go for that kind of playstyle, and if you do face a carrier, well, if he decides to drop you and you don't have defensive AA, you're pretty much dead. Honestly, any decent manual drop will absolutely shred the ship, because it doesn't have the maneuverability to avoid it. 3D de Grosse, I set 2 fires on him. The fire, once again, thanks to the huge DPM this ship has, the incredible reload and how much damage it can pump out, it's quite easy to start these multiple fires, and this guy of course used his repair, so I start 2 fires, switch to AP, and then shred him. This is very similar to Kaba type of gameplay, of course, except that you have the smokes and such available. Now, there is actually one thing which gives you a fairly good fight against Kabas, and that's of course switching to AP. But that's actually the case in many DDs, and people underestimate that even Gearing at close range does a surprising amount of damage to the Kaba if they use AP. Now of course this relies on them giving you broadside, but Kabas tend to quite happily do that because they are so used to having this DPM advantage that they don't really care too much about the angling, they just outgun you, or well, not outgun you, but out DPM you. And if you do get broadside, they have so much, well, I outspot him first of all. This is of course the advantage, you can always pick the fight. And I switch to AP. And they have enough armor, the Kaba has enough armor on the broadside that you get a lot of normal pens instead of over pens. And this of course means that AP does a nice chunk of damage, and unlike HE's shattering on the broadside, your AP does very consistent damage. As you can see here, some pretty damn big chunks. That was one volley that did 4k damage to him. So of course when you pump out this kind of damage all the time, it's quite significant. He does angle, at which point I have to switch to HE, but before I can kill him with HE, my torp finishes him off, and this is a Kraken game at this point, which is of course quite satisfying. But overall, the Grozovoy is still a work in progress. I'm still experimenting with my build. I changed away from the build I used earlier, which was very gunboat oriented, meaning I didn't have even concealment expert, and I've switched to concealment expert because once again reaching this magical threshold of 6 kilometers concealment is a huge step. Like for example, the Z52 went from being mediocre DD at 6.4 km concealment to a extremely strong DD once the concealment jumped to 6.1, because that means you can actively contest capture point. That means that you are no longer outspotted by huge margins, and you can kind of close the distance. Of course you still struggle if you happen to run into a Yugoma or something that has a significant advantage. I'm smoking up my Montana here since it's taking a lot of damage from these guys, and I'm just gonna go sail to sea and see if I can cap it, since both these guys are simply running away. Now, as I was saying, if something like you run into something like a Yugoma, if he happens to be sailing towards you, meaning you can quickly claw in the distance and thus negate his spotting advantage, then it's not that big of a deal. But if the Yugoma happens to be angled away from you and he's sailing away and he spots you, he has a 500 meter buffer, and a good Yugoma player will know to maintain that buffer and just keep you spotted. In those cases, well, you don't really have many options. You either turn away, run away, or you smoke up. Because, as I said, staying spotted, well, you saw how easy it was for that Amagi to nail me. Staying spotted is simply not an option. You are too large, too easy to hit. You can't really gunboat the same way you can in the Kaba. So, it has very distinct weaknesses, and it also has very distinct strengths. So now it's more of a case of learning to play it in the most optimal way, learning to use these strengths while mitigating the weaknesses as much as possible. I am running, I will talk about it more when I go over my build. In this commentary I am running the rudder shift, but I've been highly considering running the acceleration instead of the rudder shift, because, well, you're not really going to be agile no matter what you do, because the turning circle is too massive for that. But I do like the idea of having a better acceleration, because I have had issues with being torped in smoke, even when I've known the torps are coming, even when I've been angled towards them. Like, I've had all preparation, they have in no way caught me by surprise, but I've still eaten the torps simply because my acceleration has let me down. Like, you know they're coming, you're angled towards them, you see them plenty in time, you start accelerating, but the ship acceleration is simply so very slow, and the ship size is so very large that you don't have time to get out of the way and you get clipped by a torpedo. I have had that happen to me, so I'm still kind of working on the most optimal build and most optimal playstyle for this ship, and that's why I kind of didn't really want to make a commentary on this ship, because I dislike not being able to confidently say what I consider the best playstyle or the best build for the ship. So keep in mind that this is still kind of a work in progress kind of commentary for me. The game does end, not too much damage, 106k. I get a Kraken though, which is nice. And I mean, looking at the basic speed, 2.3k, which isn't bad. We were playing in a division with some Omni guys. So overall, it does have, the new patch gives the Grosovoy a lot more utility, because now you can bring it to divisions like this and be extremely strong. In the past, if you brought the Grosovoy to a division like this, you couldn't actively push into caps, you couldn't actively contest the caps because everything outspotted you. That's of course no longer the case, which of course means that this ship has a lot more division synergy than it did in the past. Also, of course, you are able to quite happily give up your smoke to your teammates, as you saw me smoke them up a couple of times, and that's because you're not as 100% reliant on the smoke as you were in the past. In the past, you had to have your smoke because everything else spotted you. That's no longer the case. You don't need that panic button the same way. So I do like the buff, and I do like the increase in strength. I'm still not 100% on how I wish to play this ship, but I will give you my recommended build after this. Looking at the overall damage, of course, I mostly fought their DDs in this game. I mean, I did show off some of the DPM on the Friedrich Grosse, did 41k damage to him, but mostly I was wrecking their DDs, which is something that's kind of your role. You do it kind of like Z52, your role is mostly focused on wrecking the enemy DDs. You do it in a different way than the Z52, but you're still quite strong at doing it. Anyway, let me show you my recommended build for now for the Grozovoy. Right, starting off with the Grozovoy modules. Well, first of all, you of course want to be running the improved torps because, well, there's not really much reason to run these others that have 2 km shorter range. I dislike these kind of tier 10 upgrades because they are less about having a choice and more mandatory upgrades. You kind of have to get this because there's no point to not have it. Consumable wise, premium repair, premium smoke recommended. Defensive AA, I think it's pretty much a must have because if you run engine boost, which is very nice to have, the problem becomes if a carrier decides to target you, you're not going to be dodging any sort of drops in this thing, which is why I consider defensive AA pretty much a must have. Upgrade wise, main armaments mod 1, AA range. Once again, you have very strong AA, and using this AA range increases the panic radius as well as makes you better at sniping spotter and fighter planes. Faster gun reload because fundamentally it's still a gunboat. Propulsion mod 1. Defensive AA is actually not necessarily a bad option, 20%. The problem is this only lasts 30 seconds, so if you increase it by 20%, you increase it from 30 to 36 seconds. So you gain 6 seconds, which I don't really consider as valuable as keeping your engine alive more often, because the number one reason you tend to get killed in a DD is broken engine for making you glide into torpedoes, glide out of smokes, have issues running away and so forth. And this is even with Last Stand, which I of course recommend. Broken engine is still a huge issue. So personally, I value this higher than the 6 seconds of additional defensive AA. Here there's some debate. Actually, I want to test running propulsion mod. I have been running steering gears for a long time because I liked the increased rudder shift. But the issue is I've noticed this thing accelerates extremely badly. I have had times when I had angled in smokes. I've angled towards enemy DDs. I know there's torps coming. I angle towards them. I'm perfectly prepared for them. I don't get caught by surprise in any way. And yet when the torpedoes arrive, this acceleration is so incredibly sluggish that I've still gotten clipped by those torpedoes, even though I was hoping with all my preparation that I would be able to dodge them. So I'm actually going to give this a try, where I give up 0.9 seconds of rudder shift, and I instead get the acceleration. I cannot tell you which one I recommend of these two yet, because as I said, I'm still working on it. I thought the steering gears was quite nice, but there is the issue with being caught by torps in smoke, even if you're prepared for them. The terrible acceleration on this ship makes it very, very rough to dodge those torps. So I'm going to be giving propulsion mod a try, and I will return with another commentary later to let you know how I think about what I think about this change and if it's something I recommend. For now, if you want to play it safe, just go steering gears. And finally, concealment, because well, we can finally reach very good levels of concealment, so there's no reason not to take it. Captain perks wise, preventive maintenance, turrets, engine, rudder shift, all these useful things. Last Stand, followed by additional tankiness, and followed by concealment expert. This is a pretty basic DD build. And I prefer having, well, you would probably go AFT after this, because the default range isn't really that good, and you could really want the additional range. By this time you should have at least a 14-point captain, so you should, if you have a tier 10, so you shouldn't have to pick between CE and AFT. You should be able to get them both. Once you have these, I would pick Adrenaline Rush and then build into BFT. BFT is of course fantastic on the ship because it increases your HE, your AP, basically just your guns in general by 10%, and it gives you 20% of AA, and AA, as I mentioned, is already very strong, so increasing it even further is just an additional bonus, which is why I consider the perk more valuable than Superintendent or Demolition Expert. One thing I would seriously consider is possibly Vigilance, because I really do consider it very important on this thing. In fact, I've been strongly debating giving up Survivability Expert just for Vigilance, because one of the big issues you have with the ship is, of course, you're not very good at sailing around in the open and gunboating because the ship is so large and so clumsy. So you spend a lot of time sitting in smokes and spamming, and having some additional torpedo warning might not necessarily be a bad option. But that's once again up for debate. This is the build I've been using currently, and I have been quite liking it. But once again, I still think the optimal build, so to say, is still something I'm looking for, and I cannot with 100% certainty say that I think this is the best build right now. For example, the same way I can with many other ships, I think, well, I think this build is the best because I played them so much. But the Grosovoy is still so new in its new buffed state that I cannot with 100% certainty recommend some build. But people have been requesting Grozovoi commentary so much, so I figured I will give you what I consider to be good. I can say with certainty this build is good, but I cannot say with certainty I consider it the best. And finally, of course, flag-wise, priority flags on a DD is of course detonation flag, and on a Grozovoi I would consider speed flag highly important. And of course the fire chance flags add a lot of DPS to your arsenal. These are the basics. Then you can add in things like additional AA because your AA is so good, faster consumable usage, they're useful as well, but these are ultimately more flavor. The most important ones are the detonation and speed flags, just like on all Soviet DDs. Anyway, that was my, I would say, a bit of a preemptive Grozovoi commentary because it has been requested so much, but it's still a work in progress, but I hope you guys still enjoyed it.